So before starting this panel, I would like to share my experience from Afghanistan. As we grown up with war and explosion, it became very normal for us. I remember that in the 90s, when the communist regime collapsed in Afghanistan and the civil war between the different groups of mujahideen started, and they were fighting in the streets of Kabul and other cities, we were going around and watching on the top floors of our houses and talking, oh, there was a rocket there and there was another rocket there and bombing here and there. And then during before the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, suicide bombing became very common. So every morning when we were going out of our houses, we were saying goodbye, the last goodbye of our, to our parents or to our loved ones, saying that we may not meet because explosions and suicide bombing was very common. And every day there were like 4 or 5 of them. And you never knew that where and when that's going to happen. So I just remembered those days. Sorry. I would like to start this panel by thanking the organizers and introducing the panelists. The subject of this panel is normalizing with the Assad regime. Who pays the price? As we are getting to the end of this conference, and for the sake of punctuality, I would like to go to my panelists to introduce themselves very quickly. I would like to start with Fadel. Mr. Fadel? No, he's not here. He's virtual. No. Okay. So let's go to Charles Lester. I think he is virtual.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name's Charles Lister. I'm the Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, where I direct our programming on Syria and on counterterrorism. I'm thrilled to be with you. I'm really sorry I can't be there in person, but very much feel in solidarity with all of you in Kyiv right now.
Thank you. Selena?
Hello, everyone. My name is Celine Qasim. I'm the media director for the Syrian Emergency Task Force, and I'm super grateful to be here with everyone.
Hello, good afternoon to all of you. A lot of familiar faces from yesterday. My name is Ivan Nelson. I'm the former Danish special representative for the Syria crisis.
Thank you. Okay, Fadel, please come on.
I thought you want to tell us a story.
I told the story, but you were not present here.
Okay.
I will tell you later. Repeat.
Sure. So, thank you very much again. My name is Fadl Abdelghani. I'm the head of Syrian Network for Human Rights. It's an organization working since 2011 in documenting human rights violations in Syria. We are also like one of the main source to the several UN bodies and to a lot of states, including US, UK, France, Germany, and Netherlands, Denmark, and others. Yeah, it's okay. And based on our database, I can, yeah.
Can you allow the other? Okay.
Okay.
Can we allow the other panelists, Maouz Mustafa, to introduce themselves first?
Sure.
And then we go back to you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you. Maouz Mustafa, please introduce yourself, very short and quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, my name is Muaz Mustafa. I am the Executive Director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force, and I am so sad and upset that I'm not there in person, but I hope to visit Ukraine soon, and very honored to be on this amazing panel.
Thank you. Mr. Fadel Ghani, I would like to open the floor for your introductory remarks, but I'm respectfully asking you to be short, between 3 to 5 minutes, because we are having another panel coming on. So the floor is yours.
I'll try my best to address my remarks. So here I write it to be quick, actually. I don't know what's going on. The voice not hearing, this echo. All off. Okay, so the ongoing atrocities committed by the Syrian regime against its people, like this? Now it's okay? Because when I hold near, it's becoming echo. This one? Okay. Okay. So the ongoing atrocities committed by the Syrian regime against its people have been well documented since the beginning of the popular uprising in March 2011. Despite numerous initiatives from the Arab League and the international community to end the violence and hold the regime accountable, impunity still prevails. The violations have worsened over the time, and the Assad regime has committed horrific, and those crimes some of the violation amount to be crimes against humanity. Any attempt, I want to say that by countries to re-establish relation with the Syrian regime are not only demanding, but also amount to support these crimes against humanity. So restoring the relation of this nature will only lead the regime impunity, and that similar atrocities regime sending the wrong message to the international community and disregarding the millions of victims who have suffered at the hand of the regime. Here I want to highlight that lots of violation is still going on. So there is no means to reconnect or rehabilitate with Assad. That based on the latest report issued by the International Commission of Inquiry. And based on our database, I can highlight some of the violation since the beginning of this year up to now. So we documented that the Assad regime has killed 101 civilians, and including 20 children and 7 women. And also we recorded at least 815 cases of arbitrary arrest, including 18 children and 35 women. So our concern actually is that the process of rehabilitating with Assad or reestablishing relation with Assad is that may lead to a forced return of Syrian refugees. Since April 2023, 13 of April, until June, we documented forced return for at least 874 Syrian refugees from Lebanon, including 86 women and 104 children. We also recorded arrest of, among of them, when they returned back, 87 individuals, including 5 women and 2 children. So reconnecting with Assad, it might be cause a forced return. This actually severe concern stems from the fact that when the refugees back, they faced a lot of violations, including torture, disappearance, forced conscription, extortion, and land and property seizures. What some Arab countries or any other countries have done in past few months is attempting to reestablish any of relation with the Syrian regime is firstly detrimental to the country that did so and send a wrong message on its people that they are supporting the regime who committed crimes against humanity. And also this is insulting and humiliating millions of Syrian victims who is affected by Assad regime. So furthermore, re-establish relation with Assad regime. This is or considered as a violation for the international law, as fighting the crimes against humanity and war crimes is the state responsibility. I have like few recommendation for countries who is willing or compelled, because some countries compelled based on maybe pressure from Russia or Iranian to re-establish relation with the Syrian regime. So some steps at least to be taken. So the Syrian regime should release approximately 136 political detainees, like all of those being arrested because they engage in the uprising, including revealing the fate of 96,000 forcibly disappeared, abolish the special courts and revoke all decisions issued by them. Third, return lands and property seized and looted to their rightful owners. And fourth, hold those responsible for the violation against the Syrian people accountable. The Syrian regime has not held any individual accountable for the crimes committed since March 2011, whatever his rank, small rank or high rank. So zero accountability. Acknowledge the responsibility for the committed violation and offer apologies to the victims and their families. And I think that if there is a state is willing to reconnect with Assad and take steps, Assad should at least give something in return, which is, I don't think, and this is a minimum bar, what I mentioned, and I don't believe that Assad will give any of those steps. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm coming back to you. Mr. Charles, the floor is yours. You have 3 to 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Great, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me all right. I'll try my very best to be brief. Syria's crisis, as we all gather here today in person and online, is deep within its 13th year. I think many of the statistics that I'll briefly list off are probably well known to you all, but I think they're always worth bearing in mind in a discussion like this. But at least 500,000 people, 500,000 Syrians, have been killed over the past 12 and a half years. More than 120,000 remain missing. The regime has dropped over 82,000 barrel bombs indiscriminately on Syrian civilians over the past years. It has committed 340 verified chemical and chemical weapons attacks indiscriminately against Syrian civilians. And as a result, we continue to struggle with an enormous displacement crisis. Over 6.5 million Syrians are refugees in the immediate region. Over 6 million more are internally displaced. And as we've heard to an extent, and as we'll continue to discuss, there really is no clear resolution to that mass displacement crisis, and certainly no justice and clear impunity for those many crimes. Looking at Syria writ large, it's been clear for a number of years that there have been many policymakers and other commentators who have said that Syria's war or Syria's crisis is over. There are many others who have openly wished that it was over. and done all they can to sideline it as an ongoing issue of concern. Looking back over the past 12 years or so in terms of Western policy approaches to Syria, I would say they have largely been described as or defined by risk aversion, overthinking the problem, and being all too easily distracted by other issues on the side or other issues around the world. And I emphasize all of those things in particular because I and many others are also watching with great concern how the situation in Ukraine is continuing to evolve. I will always remember when Russia launched its military intervention in Syria at the end of 2015, how the immediate gut response from the then US administration was to any of us who suggested that we should try to push back against Russia's military actions, what do you want, World War III? And I think it's been interesting to see in terms of the clear and I think aggressive and justified Western and international response to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, that has clearly not been what we have got in return. So clearly some lessons were learned, but obviously in the Syrian case, very unfortunate that Syria had to go through what it has done to learn those lessons. The biggest and clearest definition I can give to the international response to Syria has been that it's been defined by containing symptoms, managing the symptoms of the crisis, but leaving the root causes and the drivers of the conflict in Syria to the side. And that is why we are where we are today in 2023, so many years on, with no clear solution on the table. And 6 months ago, we saw a major push by regional governments in the Middle East who were essentially exasperated at the lack of international interest in trying to resolve Syria. And through that frustration, decided to do the only other thing they had in terms of options, which was to engage Assad's regime and to normalize it within the region. As I say, the seeds for that lay in fatigue, but also in a cold, hard kind of realpolitik in the region. The conclusion in the region was that Assad is here to stay. There is no threat to him being overthrown or removed or tried in an international court. And therefore, in the region, our only interest was to therefore engage, albeit grudgingly. The basis for that engagement was a kind of theory called step for step. The idea that if you give some form of a concession to the regime may give one back, and you'll find yourself in a process of sort of reciprocal confidence-building measures that will eventually lead to a political resolution. The origins for step lie in the United Nations. Clearly, it has been the definition of UN policy, and the UN Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, has been pushing the idea for step for many years. But it was embraced in particular by Jordan, one regional government, and its king, King Abdullah, who has been shopping around the step for step idea in Russia, in Moscow, in Washington with President Biden and others for at least the last 2 years. And finally, Saudi Arabia and its crown prince, MBS, kind of took the step for step idea on and drove this push 6 months ago to give it a go. But sadly, as it was very clear at the time, there was no strategy, there was no sequencing, there was no conditionality. It was engagement for engagement's sake to see where it went. And that, unfortunately, the conclusion of that was all too predictable. The regime gave absolutely nothing in return. The region gave almost everything they had to give. And the consequence is everything in Syria has worsened over the past 6 months. The regional normalization track has been a catastrophic failure. The Syrian pound has crashed far worse than it ever has done before. The economy is now truly broken in Syria. The humanitarian crisis has worsened considerably, and through a Russian veto at the Security Council, cross-border aid access has been largely cut just as of July this year. Open conflict has increased significantly in northwestern Syria, in parts of northeastern and eastern Syria. We now have a virtually unprecedented protest movement in the regime-held Sueda governorate in the southeast. which continues to this day. And the two main regional priorities that the region wanted fixed, the drug trade emanating from the Syrian regime and the mass refugee crisis in the region, both of those have not been resolved, and if anything, they have worsened too over the past 6 months. And ultimately, diplomacy around Syria is sadly almost completely dead. The UN is rudderless. The international community has resigned itself to the fact that diplomacy with the regime is unlikely to work. And of course, we have now the spiraling crisis in Gaza, which has served as another distraction.
Thank you.
So to conclude, just my final line, at the end of the day, Assad is still in place. Syria is suffering, its people are suffering, and impunity, as Fadel just said, is a very real reality.
Thank you so much. Let's learn from Celine Qasim, who is traveling actually to Syria time to time. What's the realities on the ground that you see and you witness?
So this is kind of to ground things back onto the ground, because I know when Fadel or Charles are speaking, it's so big, and we're talking about diplomacy and various different issues, but it's important also to ground the human experience of what the normalization is doing. There's various different aspects to this, so I'll try to cover them all. The regime is doing all that it can to push this normalization narrative. And one of the things that, I noticed as a person in my age, in my 20s, they're kind of, with the tourist ministry and that sort of thing, they're paying certain people that have various big platforms to come to Damascus, to come and party and to show the world that, like, look, Damascus is all safe now. Everyone should come and visit, the same way that everything was but before 2008, before 2011. So pushing that narrative of that everything is fine and everything is normal. However, people don't live that way in Damascus. Even if it's in Damascus, when it's safe, the economic situation that people are going through, I mean, it's $13 a month of a salary. People are starving to death. No one can live that luxury of being able to go out and party and live your best life if you're not a part of the crime to a certain degree. This is not me accusing everyone of being a part of the crime if you're comfortably living in Damascus, but to a certain degree, if you're able to make millions of liras to go out for one night, there is something fishy about that. So there is this aspect of all of that and making it seem like it's all fine and normal and dandy. But then, when at the Syrian Emergency Task Force, we're able to bring in journalists into northwest Syria, rebel-held Syria. And so we bring in these journalists, and they go and they do their stories that they are interested in the earthquake. Everything that you saw about northwest Syria was through us. We were able to bring so many networks, channels into northwest Syria. And recently we did a trip with PBS and New York Times. So we took them in, and it was kind of the same thing. We go, we see the destruction, we talk to families, we talk to victims and survivors of attacks. I think one of the stories that New York Times Raja was working on was when they leave things, and then when someone's walking, it explodes. I forget what it's called.
Unexploded ordinances.
Yes, those things. So we talked to a bunch of victims of that, and then so something random came up in my brain, and Muaz also recommended for this, but I filmed the same kind of narrative that they were filming, and it's like, by the way, Syria is not safe, and we need to talk about the various different aspects of why Syria is not safe, and push that, because it's nowhere near safe. People are getting bombed every single day. Our colleagues today updated us this morning in Idlib that they were bombed by Russia. They were bombed. There was 8 raids of Russian raids that bombed over northwest Syria. This happens every single day. Recently, over Idlib, it was also very bad. So just kind of humanizing what is going on. And then again, who's paying for this? It's not just Syrians, it's all of the countries that are receiving Captagon. And this is impacting their youth and impacting the way that their people are living their everyday lives. I have a friend who's a paramedic in Saudi. She's telling me that so many people are coming in overdosed on Captagon, overdosed on various different drugs. This is impacting them. And when they realize that it's impacting them and their people, I think that's when a little bit of the normalization narrative that they're doing right now might change. That's what we're hoping for. That's what kind of the goal is, to realize that even after leaving Syria on the burner, and trying to normalize, trying to also send back the refugees, this is a whole other story. I lived in Turkey the past year. Syrians in Turkey are not safe. Every single day, during the election time especially, they were scared to leave the house. They would hide their cars behind certain buildings because their license plate says that they're foreigners. It's not safe for refugees in the neighboring countries, in Turkey and Lebanon as well. The hate crimes that take place every single day. And this is because of normalization. This is because of how the politics around Syrian lives is right now. So I think what we need to be doing is showing that the regime is no one to be worked with, no one to be normalized with, and keep pushing the account for that. This is just it for now.
Thank you. One of the things that I'm finding very fascinating and interesting is the commonality between these syndicates of crimes and criminals and dictators. The same thing that Celine is mentioning about inviting the social media celebrities is happening in Afghanistan too. The Taliban is inviting African social media celebrities, and they are going around Afghanistan and showing that Afghanistan is safe. And they don't know that the crimes, the suicide bombing and the killings were in Afghanistan because of the Taliban. So the Taliban is not fighting, they are not bombing, so things are looking safe. Yvonne, can you share your experience about this?
Thank you. I will somewhat distance myself a bit from the ground reality which Celine so well presented us for. But actually, I want to just share a couple of facts, and that is basically in response to that illusion out there in certain governments and in certain populations, etc., is that Assad has won. Charles was also alluding at it, but fact one is the Assad regime, as we're sitting here today, only controls 2/3 of the territory. Fact two, in those 2/3 of the territory only live around half of the Syrian population, as it were, when the conflict broke out in 2011. That doesn't look like victory to me, to be honest with you. Fact three, the Assad regime is characterized by, and that is making very difficult for governments to deal with this issue, because we're dealing with a regime for whom Syria as a country, nor the Syrian people are high on the list of priorities. The priorities for the Syrian regime is something else, more narrow and at times very opposing interest to actually the national interest as well as the interest of the people. But let me just take us a bit down memory lane, having worked on the Syria file for 10 years until I took off my envoy hat in 2021. I remember in 2012, so what is that, 11 years ago, I was actually attending what was called a Friends of Syria group meeting in Marrakesh, Morocco, December 2012. And that was a gathering with, I think it was 120 countries, not only European countries, not only the US, Canada, Australia, what some would say the usual suspects, but basically the entire world, all Arab countries, many African countries, Asian countries, And they all somewhat shook hands politically on the need that we need to see fundamental changes in Syria. Obviously, the 120 countries didn't agree about the specifics. That's not what I'm saying, but there was an overall agreement that what we are seeing in Syria, kind of the crackdown on the popular uprising, was simply not to be accepted, and that those, let's say, conflict dynamics and the reality in Damascus had to undergo fundamental changes for the sake of the Syrian people, but also for wider security considerations. Now fast forward to 2023. Some of those countries in that meeting in Marrakesh in December 2012 are now the ones that are, to varying degrees, normalizing relations with the regime. And I guess if we then had seen the changes that they all called for and established in 2012, if we were seeing these changes, also addressing the root causes of oppression, marginalization, corruption, human rights violations, then obviously it would have been fine. But as Fadel has also illustrated with the latest data, it's still the same regime DNA. Oppression, human rights violations, it is still the very same regime which attacked its own people with chemical weapons, as also mentioned by Charles earlier on. So there's absolutely no changes. So you can say it's both kind of heartbreaking, but also analytically, how can it be justified and explained that you basically are looking at turning the clock back to 2011 without any changes? You can simply not put, and yet again, those who have had the pleasure of working with Syrians know the resilience of the Syrian people. Whatever has happened, you can simply not just sweep it under the carpet. It's not only not the right thing to do, but there's no way you can do that. And we'll for sure not have stability and peace in Syria before some of these fundamental root causes are addressed sufficiently and defined as fundamental changes in the power structures and in Damascus. Then I would also add that when it comes to normalization, it takes different forms and shapes. Obviously, the most, let's say, visible and highest level diplomatic one was the readmission of Syria into the Arab League, which we saw a few months ago. But normalization can also take other shapes. It can be the travel bloggers or whatever they're called going to Damascus and sending an image of normality. But I'll also add another one, and that is actually, and it is a bit shameful for me to say, but for instance, when the Danish government assesses that it is safe for Syrian refugees to return to Damascus, Rif Damascus, to Latakia and Tartus, the fact that they don't do forced returns, that's a separate issue, but the fact that the Danish government assesses that it's safe to go back, first of all, those decisions are wrong. We can just relate it to the statistics and the assessments by SNHR and other organizations. But it also, if I was sitting in Damascus and a very, let's say, a traditionally known human rights champion like Denmark assesses it's safe to go back, I clearly would use that in my own messaging and propaganda machine, because then saying it's safe to go back somewhat is close to signaling normalization, end of conflict, and from there is a slippery slope towards normalization. So my message here is that, and also there was a reason why countries cut diplomatic ties, why they shut the embassies in Damascus, why they somewhat distanced themselves, even to the degree of total isolation of the regime. It was felt that that was one of the most efficient ways of applying pressure on the regime in order for a chance for them to engage in the political process or politically negotiate into the conflict. And now the fact that these very countries are somewhat, at least with the one eye, forgetting all of this, conveniently so for many, for political reasons, is simply not the way to go, both because it is wrong, but also because it does not bring us stability and peace in Syria.
Thank you very much, Mouz Mustafa. The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir, so much for moderating this panel, and it's so again, it's a huge honor for me to be alongside these amazing individuals that I also consider dear friends, and And it's such an honor for our organization, the Syrian Emergency Task Force, an American organization that works on Syria, to be in Ukraine. Because I remember in the first week of the re-invasion, because when Crimea was taken away, that was the beginning, and parts of the east as well. But with this latest re-invasion of Russia of Ukraine, there were so many people, and you can talk to so many Syrians, including the ones that are physically there with you and the ones on the ground, that wanted to go and fight and defend and resist alongside the Ukrainian people. And that is because it is fundamentally, like in the eyes of those, especially the Syrian people, the Ukrainian people, those that are demanding freedom, democracy, dignity, liberty, universal rights that are afforded everywhere, that this is fundamentally the exact same war. If a Russian Air Force pilot is brought down in Syria, that's a victory in Ukraine. And if Ukraine is victorious, that's a victory for the Syrian people. And that's something that is alive and well clear and understood amongst the Syrians. And I just wanted to reiterate that message. That being said, and on the topic of normalization, I'll try to be very brief. You know, there are different culprits, as Ivan mentioned, and I agree with sort of the majority of what everybody said. But we do see some of these Arab countries, as Fadl also mentioned, that kind of tried to spearhead, and as Charles also highlighted, to sort of spearhead this normalization effort. And they were giving these three general reasons. One, detaching Syria from Iran, seen as an adversary to, you know, the Gulf and allies of the US, to the West, et cetera, a destabilizing force in the Middle East. Two, Captagon, wanted to stop that, which is flowing, produced on a mass scale by the Assad regime and Iran, with, of course, the okay from Russia. And three, in order for refugees to return. And what's ironic is, and as some of the panelists mentioned, this was all given over with nothing in return. So they went from a place of leverage, these normalizing countries, and then they put themselves not just as giving everything away for nothing, but actually put all the leverage on the Assad regime / Iran / Russia's side. And I think that's a massive foreign policy failure. So let's look at the implications really briefly of normalization. Captagon will continue. That's not just addiction of citizens and so on. That's also criminal networks that will continue in the area. So that will continue. Refugees returning, even if there is forceful repatriation of refugees, the millions of people that yearn to go home, that would do anything to go home, even if their home is burned down, they'll go back and fix it, will never go back willingly as long as Assad's there, because any checkpoint can stop you and torture you to death, period. This is not an exaggeration. Number three, when it comes to Iran, after the admission into the Arab League, Assad regime invited, and Assad, it's not even the Assad regime, it's just a giant militia of Iran, a proxy of Iran and Russia, no more. But they invited Raisi, the Iranian president, to Damascus to a state visit. I mean, the Iranian president held court in Damascus. People came and saw him and left, not the other way around. So on all those three, I think all of these normalizing, especially Arab and Gulf nations, are now thinking really hard about what a failure this has been. Not in terms of just giving stuff away for nothing in return, but giving leverage to someone they had complete leverage over. Because what does Assad want? He just wants to be seen as legitimate, as a normal country. And they gave him that right away. The other thing that I think we should really think about when it comes to normalization, and here we're looking in terms of normalization by potentially European countries, Asian, African, wherever. It sends a message, and this is a time where everything is covered, where everything is watching. As you all know, we live in a very globalized world. So globalized that when nobody stopped Russia in Syria and other countries, it allowed them to invade Ukraine. And so globalized that the war in Ukraine, to me and to every Syrian I've spoken to that's on the ground, is the exact same war. And we're in the same fight against tyranny, good versus evil. Is that every dictator across the world that has a peaceful uprising, whose people may demand reforms, whose people may demand democracy, as if that's some tough demand to ask, that then he can kill, with conventional and internationally banned weapons. He can literally use chemical weapons. That wouldn't be a surprise if chemical weapons were used tomorrow in Syria. It's become a norm thanks to Assad. You can torture to death countless people. You can displace well over half your country, kill hundreds of thousands, 1 million or more. And then on a long enough time scale, if you stay there somehow, even if you're barely hanging on, then that may mean you can remain in power despite what your people want. And that's not exclusive to Syria. That makes it a problem for the world, international world order. That makes it a problem for every place in the world because dictators are watching as much as people and victims are as well. And I would finally just, the last point is to reiterate what Ivan said. Assad has not won. It is a miracle that, but like the fact is, you have the whole Russian Air Force. At one point, 80% of ground troops were Iranian for the Assad regime, the full conventional army, the intelligence and security branches, and he's had 13 years fighting against people with like AK-47s most of the time and not enough bullets to go, to continue a fight. Yet despite that, he has not been able to control the majority of his country. And areas under his control are the most miserable out of areas that he and Assad and Russia are even, he and Iran and Russia are even bombing. And that tells us a lot. That shows us that there is something when people are fighting for their land, like the Ukrainians are and the Syrians are. It's really, really tough to defeat an entire population. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I remember that not long ago we were talking about Assad leaving the power, going to Russia without any prosecution or anything. But now what has changed actually? What has changed that everybody is trying to normalize him and everybody is inviting him to the different capitals? What are the consequences for the Syrian people?
I think that they try to reconnect with Assad. They try to give some steps in exchange to seize something from Assad. But I think they failed. And I noticed that past months that there is a slightly change in some countries who try to rehabilitate Assad, and they are back now, and I think they slightly changed their policy toward again convinced that Assad cannot do anything, and he will not, and I think he is unable to do a lot of what is being requested. And I don't like to exaggerate actually, because there is no white badge offered to Assad without any condition. There is always condition. In Amman meeting, Cairo meeting, Riyadh meeting, there is always a condition. There is but what is shocked us actually, that they are the one, or some of those countries, they are the one who took the first step. Which is like their demand in 2012 that Assad should take those steps because he committed the aggression against and committed crimes. So he should rectify those crimes and apology and all of that. But when they invited Assad and break the gap and bring him back to Arab League, that shocked us and we condemned that. But past months, I noticed that there is a change in Jordanian opinion, in even Saudi Arabia, even UAE actually. I can't say that also that the majority of only we did a report actually. We reviewed all of the Human Rights Council votes. Only 10 or 11 states vote for Assad's sake. Actually, even those who is like dictatorship or authoritarian regime, they care about their reputation. So who's voted for Assad? Russia, Cuba, Venezuela, Algeria, Iran, all of those dictatorship states. Only there is no democratic state or semi-democrat or whatever, they voted for Assad. And here I want like to offer our like deep gratitude and appreciation for Ukraine. They always stood beside us and voted for the Syrian people against Assad. So the vast majorities and still till this moment, but I can like echo what my colleague Ivan said. Okay, this now only what we are noticing is condemnation, and now even after Idlib attacks, we didn't get a condemnation against what Assad committed, but I think that there is no, till this moment, based on my bilateral meeting with a lot of foreign ministries around the world, there is no change against Assad. We know we don't want like to terrify the Syrian people. We need to be accurate. And those actually, as I mentioned, who want to rehabilitate with Assad, they also change their, and there is no, as I mentioned again, there is no white badge offer to Assad. But what is required actually, that and it's a far change between changing Assad and political process toward ending Assad toward the democratic change, and now the political process is like pre-negotiation state. It's stuck for 4 years, and we never heard any word about Assad must leave or Assad should be held accountable. We don't hear that repeatedly as we used to do before, which is considered a dramatic change in the lot of state attitude because of, I think, the long term of the conflict, and they are engaged in another conflict. That not a justification at all, because Syria is still bleeding, and Syrian refugees is one of the highest around the world. We're talking about 14 millions. And here I can assure that the vast majorities of those, I'm meeting a lot of, they want to be back. They want. On contrary, what they are saying, a lot of people saying that, okay, they don't want, no, they want to be back, but not back to death, not back to torture, not back their land being seized, and they want actually. Even the ITPs, they want, it's only half an hour from their tents toward their houses, but their houses, like they are aware of what they're gonna to face if they are back. So I think here we need to address how dangerous is the normalization, but on the other hand, we need to describe what is the exist situation and hope that this will not deteriorate further, rather than, again, those states demand to take further steps against Assad, to be held accountable, to push the political process based on 2254 resolution. I think that what is that lots of human rights, Syrian local human rights organization played a pivotal role in breaking the Assad rehabilitation via showing that still Assad apparatus is committing the same crimes, nothing being changed. They push ahead toward universal jurisdiction court, which all of those obstacles in front of any reconnection with Assad, as I mentioned, based on law, always my perspective is as a law background to have the law angle. And for example, the ICJ case against Assad, this is a major issue actually, and it's for sure make any state or government want to reconnect or shaking Assad hand, rethink again. This this regime is facing a case torturing his people in front before the International Court of Justice. This is a major issue. This is not a small things too. And I think that the lot of Syrian civil society organizations, they played this role to make such reconnecting with Assad so much difficult, and show and prove to the state that they want to reconnect with Assad, how much they are will be involved in and supporting the Assad crimes against humanity.
Thank you, Fadel. Charles, in addition to my question that I asked from Fadel, I want to point out that this normalization of going Assad to different capitals is I'm sure is sold by the regime very quickly to the public that things are changing. And I know the impact of media on public relation. So how do you see that?
I think that's a clear question. I mean, a great question. The regime is obviously desperate and has been desperate over the past 6 months to present an image to its people or to Syria's people that that it is being rehabilitated, and it's being rehabilitated irreversibly. And so obviously every single one of those trips, rolling out the red carpets in various places in the region, and then his visit to China, has all been presented within that kind of realm. But I think what's been really, really clear over the past 6 months is that despite all of those visits, his travels, statements made by regional governments, his readmission into the Arab League, like I said in my opening comments, the situation in Syria within that context deteriorated in every respect. And I think the fact that we have seen people come to the streets in Sweda in the south, in Deraa as well, and then we have seen Syrians elsewhere in the country come to the streets in solidarity with their fellow countrymen and women elsewhere in the country in regime-held areas. I think it, underlines one very simple truth, which is that despite the optics of the regime looking like it being rehabilitated and being rehabilitated irreversibly, the reality for Syrians on the ground tells a very different reality, which is that the regime clearly isn't a solution to all of the various means with which Syrians are having to suffer. Assad has not revitalized the economy despite having been brought back into the Arab League. He hasn't ended any of his ongoing crimes against the Syrian people. He hasn't ended his aggression against areas that are outside of his control. He hasn't released a single political prisoner amidst all of that normalization activities. The list can go on. So I think Syrian people are more than aware of that reality. I think before the big wave of regional re-engagement that began in April this year, I think there were many Syrians who probably were just resigned to the reality that Assad may not have won, but that he wasn't going away anywhere. But I think the experience of the past 6 months, the regime's attempt to sell the idea that the world was opening back up to it, but then the reality on the ground deteriorating so markedly in so many ways, has really underlined that message for Syrians all across the country, that the regime is at the moment still in place, but it certainly doesn't offer a solution. And that then leads us back into the situation I was trying to describe, which is we're in this terrible stalemate whereby the regime clearly hasn't won. In fact, I think I wrote an article nearly 5 years ago saying the regime hasn't won. I got a great deal of criticism for that, but I think it's all been borne out. What it has done, though, is that for now, at least, it's survived. And that is the reality that drove the regional re-engagement. That is the reason why the international community more broadly has somewhat disengaged from previous attempts to more aggressively try to resolve the Syrian crisis using diplomacy. And I don't know where we go from that. I think Fadel is absolutely right to remind us all that in Europe in particular, there are accountability and justice initiatives that are making real progress, that are having an effect outside. But of course, inside Syria, the reality remains exactly the same. And there isn't a big international appetite to push Syria diplomacy, very sadly. I would like to tell you a different story, but sat in Washington, D.C., This Syrian crisis is something that the president explicitly told his immediate deputies, keep Syria off my desk. And so everything we have seen since then has been to do exactly that, which is, as I described it, which is containment. And whether something will change, whether we have a new administration, remains to be seen. But we are, where we are right now, which, again, like I'm saying, gives us lots of lessons to learn for cases like Ukraine. Mistakes not to be made, certain things to really emphasize to the public, the importance of pushing justice and accountability measures, collection of evidence right from the get-go, which Ukraine has done such a superb job on right from the start. All of these things are lessons to be learned from the tragic and, as I say, ongoing situation in Syria.
Thank you, Charles. I totally agree with you that unfortunately the current administration, particularly the president, is very picky on his agendas. He also told the staff that do not bring Afghanistan issues to the table. And he also publicly said that in one of his press conferences. Selena, do you want to add something on this?
I mean, no, I agree. And they're way more knowledgeable and experts on everything that they're saying. I think just in Arabic, the word is called tarakum. In English, that would be just like the buildup of all of the amazing prosecution efforts that people in Europe are working on, as well as in the US. There's specific cases that are very, very important, even if we see the international stage putting Syria again and again on the side. I think that if we still work and stay on our path of justice and trying to one after another push to hold this regime accountable, even if it's us telling the stories, if you get one more person to know about what this dictator did to our people, then that's, I think, in my eye, a win. And that they want us to stop. They want us to, put this on the side, get along with our life wherever we sought refuge in, if that was in Canada for me or wherever it was for all of us. They want us to just get along and move on from what happened to us and forget of the war crimes that were committed on our people. But what we should do is to stay in this ground and to stay working and build up that justice.
Thank you. Yvonne, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think first, I also just want to counter this notion that actually many countries have started normalizing. It is still, if we do a head count, probably 1, 2, 3 handful. Still very unhelpful and clearly weakens the international collective hand, but it is still, I think, I'm pretty sure that Damascus and Assad himself was hoping that this normalization trend would lead to a domino effect. But if you look at it, Europe collectively is still standing firm around the bottom policy lines. So is the US. Some of you may be aware that there is, in the political landscape in the US, discussions around passing a Assad Anti-Normalization Act, basically turning the US policy into law. Moaz can speak much more into that. So yet again, we shouldn't necessarily dramatize. And I would say, so they're calling the alarm off? Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, good, yeah. It's a very kind reminder. Yeah, thank you. So I think so that's the one bit. Okay. So that's that bit, and for sure, I think from a European perspective or from a Western perspective, more collectively, obviously, the vast majority of those countries, they will not be first movers when it comes to changing the Syria policy fundamentally. Some capitals, not least in Europe, are still thinking and looking at it. Should we slowly have a certain rapprochement with Damascus again? But they will not be first movers because they also know there is too much at stake. They also do know that actually, almost without exceptions, their domestic constituencies if all of a sudden there was a European minister on a plane to Damascus tomorrow shaking hands with the war criminal Assad, that minister would know very well that he would be at the receiving end of massive criticism by large parts of the population, by the media and otherwise. So there's this reluctancy. And you know, in politics, there's a simple tool to be applied, and that is, on sensitive matters, you do it collectively in the form of alliances. So not individual countries will not go down that tangent. That's my clear assessment. So as long as the bottom line's about we need to continue applying pressure on the regime in the form of abstaining from normalization, maintaining sanctions, and basically saying no to paying any reconstruction support in the absence of a genuine political process. As long as that is the policy line kept in Washington, Berlin, Brussels, Paris, and London, then I'm not overly concerned what would happen on that side. So I think that's on the political reality side.
Thank you. We are a little bit over time with this panel, but Maouz, you're the last but not least of this panel. Fadel mentioned some issues about that countries like Iran or Russia are trying and compelling other countries to normalize with Assad. What about the Arab states? What's the reason for them to normalize with Assad? Can you answer this?
Sure, yeah. I think in general, the Arab states wanted, number one, to get rid of the Captagon problem that Assad created, wanted to get sort of Iran more at bay by pulling Assad away from it in their thinking. They wanted to be able to get rid of the refugees, get them back to Syria. And all of those three things have already backfired. And they gave away their biggest prize. Like if you're in a negotiation, you kind of sit there, and then you get closer, then you come to a deal. In this negotiation, what the Arab states did, and this, again, doesn't significantly change anything for the Syrians, because as Ivan is saying, like, the Arab League, and at least some of the members in the Arab League that are, brought back Assad, etc., have only hurt themselves, because Captagon's only increased, Iran's only further entrenched in Syria, and the fact is that refugees are more fearful than ever. Not just that, there are more refugees being created. Assad and Russia and Iran have not stopped bombing the Northwest. And I also want to just say, since I was able to do that succinctly, as an answer, just a couple of things. One, just a few days ago, I was with U.S. forces in southern Syria in a besieged camp, a camp besieged by the Russians, the worst living conditions I've ever seen. And what was shocking, and this should probably be reported or something, is that the Russians were overflying the 55-kilometer zone, and one of the days 3 times. And so we would hear the alarm from the base, the U.S. base. This is a deconfliction zone that's supposed to belong to the United States Air Force and the international coalition in this area, that the Russians continue. So it's the same thing that's happening in both. And so it just leaves me with one thing. I think the best way to get to a free and a Ukraine that retains its democracy, its independence, and regains every inch of its land, and for the Syrians to transition for the first real time to a democracy that they all deserve and have fought and spilled so much blood for, is for Ukraine and Syria and others that are in the same fight against these same evil forces to work together, particularly in advocacy in Washington. Because we as Syrians and Ukrainians should both be working as much as they can to make sure that we do have it on the desk of the president, the problem of Syria and Ukraine, because it's the same one. And I think things like the Syria-Ukraine network and in working more and more together, I think that's what's gonna lead our people to victory. And again, just praying for the people of Ukraine's safety all the time, and those in Syria and everywhere else. Thank you for giving me the chance to take part.
Thank you so much. I wish, okay, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think we should now celebrate there's no longer an alert, so I'll take a few more minutes if okay, because none of us picked up also what Charles was saying about the UN and their efforts the UN is mandated by Security Council Resolution 2254 to facilitate a political solution for Syria. That's in brief. Sadly, as of late and increasingly so, we have seen the UN shying a bit away from that path. Obviously, the UN is a big family with many cousins and nephews and many agencies and branches. But when it comes to the political mandate, obviously a precondition for that to succeed is that you are the honest broker, completely impartial, the one that somewhat holds the two Syrian parties, the Syrian regime and the opposition, at the same level and have a balanced approach to them at all times. As of late, we have seen a couple of deviations from that when it comes to the UN engagement in and on Syria. And one example is from last year, if I remember correctly, is that the UN and the Syrian regime entered a strategic framework. It's basically a framework that guides the UN engagement and support to a given country. And one reality is obviously that the UN is still much more comfortable, both politically, formally, legally, and otherwise, to deal with formally recognized governments, and that is still the Syrian regime. They still have a seat in the UN and in the UN General Assembly. So that is a reality, whether we like it or not. I think it is still far too constrained and does not factor proper conflict context into consideration. But my point is here that strategic framework, one would think that when you do a strategic framework, it is based on analysis. At least that's kind of the school I'm brought up in, and that's my world. But the conflict and political analysis in that document, which was agreed by the regime, and I'm not kidding, is limited to a one-liner, and that's a line along the lines of something. There has been a conflict in Syria since 2011, full stop. That's the conflict analysis. And obviously, the UN most likely felt and had to accept, but willingly did so, that if they went further than that, then the regime would not agree it. I personally, and I was fighting it when I was still the diplomat, I think that is harmful because, yet again, by completely having a almost closed eyes approach to a conflict analysis, you actually also contribute in a certain way towards that trend of normalization, the picture of normalization. Another one from the strategic framework is equally shameful, and that is that I'm sure now Fadel has to close his ears, because when it comes to the human rights situation, the way that is depicted in the strategic framework, and I'm not kidding, it is limited to basically factually stating that the Syrian Arab Republic is the signatory to most major human rights conventions. Full stop. I think, yet again, I won't dispute the facts. I'm not that kind of person, but I think that it is a bit more nuanced than that. And when it comes to human rights, I think it's not about whether you are ratified or not, it is whether you comply with them or not. And then lastly, and that was the term that Charles used, a step for step, which is now I would not even label it a strategy, I would label it tactics by the UN Special Envoy. And that is, as Charles was saying, it is something that the UN is now pursuing with the Syrian regime, whether they can tempt the Syrian regime to give some concessions and then bring, let's say, offers on the table from not least European countries in terms of sanctions, relief, and support to early recovery and the like. And while step for step for me is a generic negotiation tool, there's nothing unique in that. Any negotiation is give and take, whether it's a negotiation at the highest level in peace talks or even in your own house, I guess. It's about give and take at times. So there's nothing unique around that. But my point is here, because obviously the Syrian opposition, the Syrian civil society, they're not the ones that can bring anything on the table in that equation. They're not the ones that have detained people, killed people, tortured people, and stopped misbehaving. And they're not the ones that can bring sanctions relief. So with this approach, the UN is actually writing out of the equation the Syrian opposition, Syrian civil society, because it is a direct dealing between countries and Damascus. And hence, if there's no Syrian civil society, Syrian opposition engaged, whatever happens is absolutely null and void of legitimacy. So while it will not go anywhere because the regime will not deliver anything, it's also conceptually very problematic that the UN has this approach, and it deviates from the principle of parity between the Syrian parties.
Thank you for this about the role of UN, but unfortunately, in many cases, I have witnessed that UN have played negative role in many places. In Afghanistan, right after the Taliban takeover, the UNAMA, the United Nations Assistance Mission for Afghanistan, is busy whitewashing the Taliban and telling the entire world that you should normalize the relationship with the Taliban. So with that, I'm concluding this session. Thank you, everyone, for participation, and thank you for listening.